Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email me, tmosso@thewatchbox.com. It's in the description below. Your purchase and pricing email question line for buying this or any watch you see on any Watchbox platform. Email tmosso@thewatchbox.com for pricing. Today, we're discussing the Moritz Grossmann Benu Power Reserve. Moritz Grossmann is a small independent brand out of Glashütte, East Germany, founded by Christine Hutter in 2008. She is a watchmaker with previous experience on the retail and on the watchmaking side with the Lange and Glashütte Original. And so she brought an age-old name from East German watchmaking, Moritz Grossmann, into an enterprise that was entirely new and focused on doing as much in-house as possible. So the impressive manufacture that they have in Glashütte turns out watches like this. Very beautiful in detail, and in many regards almost like a more soulful version of Lange that competes with the likes of Laurent Ferrier, F.P. Journe, and H. Moser & C. They make about 200 to 400 watches a year, so you get a sense of the volume. It is very low, and these are wonderfully subtle watches. So let's start with the basics. At 41 millimeters in diameter in white gold, it's 11.6 millimeters thick. From lug tip to lug tip, 50.3 millimeters. It has a 20 millimeter spacing between the lugs. We'll throw it on my wrist. My wrist is 16 centimeters in circumference. It's definitely large for a dress watch, and I recommend you have a wrist of at least my size, 16 centimeters circumference, to maintain an elegant ratio of wrist to machine. Now you can see it's nice and flat, and with a wonderfully minimal bezel, it will slide underneath the dress cuff, so don't worry about that. The timepiece has a strap of high-grade, large rectangular scale alligator leather, and you can see this is a particularly good cut of it. Jean Rousseau of Paris is, among others, the OEM strap supplier to F.P. Journe. We often order Jean Rousseau straps to bring out the best in watches. You know, when you see large symmetrical scales, you're looking at the best cut of the alligator, and that's what we have right here. We have a narrow folded edge, a monotone stitch. It's black semi-gloss. You can see calfskin on the bottom, a brand new strap, and then matched with a Moritz Grossmann white gold pin buckle. Now you can see here that the white gold is a little bit warmer in tone than if it were rhodium plated. So this is gray gold, which is an 18 karat white gold alloy that's white all the way through and never needs to be plated with any other metal. You can see that the lugs are broken out from the case band, so they're distinct, but they're not quite as dramatically stepped as you'll find on, for example, a Lange 1. If you look carefully, you can see there's a little bit of a concave dish profile to the lugs. I mentioned subtlety, and this watch has it in spades. You can see we have a very minimal, almost seamless bezel that gives way to a dramatically boxed sapphire, and that boxed sapphire gives a bit of a vault over the bezel. We have an unbranded crown, which is a wonderfully nostalgic vintage touch by the company, and you can see the unique system for setting. So what happens is when you pull a crown out, you generally stop the watch, or at least you engage the motion works for setting, even if the watch doesn't have stop seconds. But in general, what happens is there's a little bit of play, some imprecision, and oftentimes the hands move when you replace the crown, when you push it back in. So what Moritz Grossmann did was they created a system where you activate hacking seconds, and just like that, you've stopped the movement, you've engaged the setting mechanism, and the balance is stopped, and you can see that easily here. I don't have quite as many nails as I used to. I manicure for you guys, but your hands will grip it more surely. So once you've set the time, the way this works is you simply align, and then you press this button. We'll do this with the balance visible. And you can see it re-engages the time telling. So there's no need to replace the crown and push it back in. There's no additional play or risk of displacement when the watch resumes timekeeping. So it has a unique setting system and a unique hacking system all at once. You'll appreciate that the dial is made of solid sterling silver. So like a silver dollar, it is a big disc of sterling silver. It has a nickel anthracite coating on top, or ardoise you might call it, and we have a little step down that is turned in the dial for the sub-seconds, which features a set of quarter Arabic numerals, and then a little railroad track. Outboard, we have a sectored track for reading the minutes of the day. You'll appreciate that there's a power reserve indicator up at 12 o'clock. And as you wind the watch and energize its manual wind 42-hour power reserve, more and more of the power reserve turns silver white and less turns red. The timepiece includes lovely hands made in-house. This is a big part of Moritz Grossmann watchmaking. They make their own hands, and they make their own screws. They make their own balance, and you'll see all of that in a moment. But for the hands, they cut them and then they black polish them. They insert a white ceramic material called high ceram, and then they polish it and they render it flush with the hands themselves, so there's no tangible seam between ceramic and the steel itself. Now, turning it all over, you can see that the movement is beautifully traditional, but in a lot of ways that you might miss at first glance. First, take a quick look. The screws are actually a sort of violet brown. Now, this is a color that's achieved by carefully timing the oxidation of the screws. If you fire screws to kingdom come, they'll turn a pleasing blue hue. But if you time the firing and you come up somewhat short, you actually pull prior to the bluing process, you get this lovely brown violet tone, and it's easy to uniformly blue screws. You just keep firing them for an hour. But here you actually have to make sure that you stop the firing before it turns blue. So you start with this violet color and you stop with that violet color. Now you can see there's freehand engraving both for the escape wheel cock and for the balance cock, and you can see that this is done to a level of detail and resolution that you won't find on a longa. It's done manually with a burr and it's hand engraved, but again, the level of detail and intricacy is much higher. Take a quick look at all of the pivot jewels. You can see they're clear sapphires. No reason for synthetic rubies. Why pretend that you're something you're not? So the sapphires are as clear as the crystals on the case back and the dial side. Take a quick look. There is a micrometric screw fixed regulator, and that little rack system, which is a screw and an index, allows for micrometric adjustment for intervals smaller than 5 seconds of deviation. Otherwise, you could see that we have conventional curbing pins, which is where much of the changes ordinarily get rendered, as the curb pins, in conjunction with the position of the regulator, will shorten or lengthen the effective length of the hairspring. And here they start with a Nivarox hairspring, but then they shape it themselves in-house in Glasuta to give it an overcoil profile, which better helps to center the mass. And by centering the mass, you reduce the positional variation as the watch sits at different positions on the wrist. Now you can see the Grossman balance is enormous. It's physically huge. It also has recessed bolts. These bolts are variable inertia. They're used to set the timing of the watch in conjunction with the micrometric, so you can make small changes here and then larger changes on the rim. You can also appreciate that it is a traditional big slow beating balance, 18,000 vibrations per hour, 2.5 hertz. Take a quick look. Lots going on here. We have black polish on the crown wheel core. We have both black polished and fired violet brown screws. We have satination on some surfaces. You can see that the ratchet wheel, which sits atop the barrel, has been triple solarized, and then if you look carefully, it's a little bit difficult to see, but if you look at the crown wheel rim, the edge of the ratchet wheel, and then the intermediate wheel that sits adjacent, all of those little teeth are interior beveled, which is extraordinarily time-consuming to accomplish. Now we have lustrous and luminous waves. They are Glasuta stripes, but they're immensely broad. You can see just how deep their gradient is in color from side to side, and the stripes are laid down by abrasive wheel, but much larger than conventional Geneva waves. Look carefully, you can also see mirrored anglage of the highest grade. I don't know what the German term is for anglage, but in English we call it beveling or chamfering, and you can see it's been rendered on the edge of every bridge. You'll also appreciate that all of the engraving in the bridges is done by hand. So not only do we have freehand engraving on the structures adjacent to the balance, but you can actually see that all of the numerals and characters have been freehand engraved, and of course it uses German silver, which is a nickel copper zinc alloy that relies on the copper to give it that lovely golden hue, and it's a little bit paler than the German silver used on, for example, Lange, and that's deliberate. This is a much more thoughtfully, carefully, and time-consumingly decorated movement. You'll also appreciate that there's media blasting on the base plate of this caliber 100.2, which is created almost entirely in-house at Moritz Grossmann. And look at the attention to detail. You can see that the screw atop the ratchet wheel has been interior beveled and exterior beveled. This is truly as good as it gets. 30 meters water resistance, so don't test its water resistance. You have sports watches for that, but reach out to me, Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com for pricing.